Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This session is collaborating on content audits. And a little bit about myself. I'm dmkelner. I've been the managing partner at Sleight of Hand Studios for the last 15 years. And I do a lot of content strategy. I've also just started a new business called Insightful Culture that's going to be working with organizations on managing stress within the organization and the impact that culture has on the stress of its employees. So you'll see a little of that woven through this session, and I will be speaking tomorrow as well at 10 o'clock if you're interested in hearing more about that. So this is the drawer. We all have this, right? Does anyone not have a drawer that looks like this or a room that looks like this? I dated a guy who had an entire room that looked like this. And it was called the Forbidden Room, and I wasn't allowed to go in it. But then once I decided I was going to marry him and we had to move him, I got to see what was in the room. This is the drawer that you put something in. And you go, I got to find it. And you go and you dig around, and you cannot find it. So you go back out, get in the car, go buy what it is that you needed, and then when you're done with it, you go, well, that's the drawer it belongs in, and you put it back in the drawer. A week later, you're looking for this thing again, and you go back in the drawer, and you can't find it. Because who knows what happened between now and then, but everything got jumbled up again, and again, you can't find it. This is called hoarding. And this is what we do with our websites. We hoard content. We have to be brave. We have to decide, do I need this? Okay? It's not just about rearranging, but it's about purging. So I want to read a quote from my idol, Christina Halverson. If you have not read Content Strategy for the Web, it should be on your night table. And this quote says, "You lie awake at night thinking about your content. There's so much to fix, so much to plan for. You want to get ahead, but you can barely keep up with what's happening day to day. The last time you tried talking to somebody about the big picture, the conversation was cut short by yet another content emergency that put you right back into reactive mode. And the content keeps coming and coming and coming." We need to move away from being reactive with our content to being proactive about our content. Our content should always be viable and should always be relevant. We all have a similar process to this, so this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. We look at our audience and figure out who we're speaking to and what do they need. We look at the content strategy and say, how are we going to balance our business goals and our user needs? We look at the marketing, what the channels are, how we're going to distribute all our content. Then we kind of do this dance between editorial execution and governance and say, what are we going to create? When are we going to schedule it? And how are we going to monitor it and plan it and keep it updated? And nowhere in this picture does it say, my department gets placed on the homepage. Nowhere in this picture does it say that your CEO's ego fits into this process. Okay? This is about the user. The website is a container, and it's a container for our content. It serves no other purpose. So why do we need to audit our content? And the biggest reason we need to do this is because we need to turn content strategy into fact-based decision making. This isn't about anyone's preference. It isn't about anyone's likes or dislikes. It's about whether your content is actually serving your audience and serving your organization. That marriage between the organization's goals and what the users need to do on the site. Okay? The audit is the key for making all our content strategy work and getting us all on neutral territory so that we're all looking at the facts and making decisions that are based on fact. But I have a secondary motive with this lecture today. And that is, I want to create respect for content strategy. We're not an afterthought. And so to create credibility for our industry is a key component of our jobs. And so you're going to see how we're going to bring together today best practice in doing content audits and at the same time using it as a way to get a seat at the table. So we're going to just start out with, when is it a good time to audit? And as we're all migrating from 7 to 8, as my friend here told me before we started, this is the time to do an audit, okay? We don't want to be dragging all that old cruff along with us. It's time to get rid of it, stop hoarding the content, and start fresh. So that's a great time to audit. If you're doing a redesign, if you're moving from one CMS to another, if you've been fortunate to get somebody to leave WordPress and come into our Drupal community, another great time to audit. Additionally, on a rolling basis, we should be auditing our content. So now is a great time for all of us to audit. So thinking back to the drawer, or thinking back to that room, we never miss the junk. We pack all our boxes when we move, just like a migration. We pack our boxes, we put them in the moving truck, we get to the other side, and we put the boxes in the basement. And we never look at them again. And I have to say I'm guilty of this. I moved into my home 18 years ago, and I have a basement full of boxes I've never opened. So I get it. There's a lot of junk. We don't want to use our websites to archive content. So does anybody here have an organization that thinks that the website is a place for archiving? Yeah, no, right? Okay, so you can relate to this. It's also not a place to store unstructured information. I had a client who felt that after an event, the thing for them to do was to use the content, the text field, and just use it as a blob and throw everything about the conference into one field. So they would say, John Doe spoke about whatever topic, and here are his slides, and here are the salient points of his lecture. And so who could ever find that information again? So people use their websites in very clever ways after we deliver them. And a content audit gives us the opportunity to see what came up. What happened between the time we delivered and the time of the next audit? Did it bring new insights into how the content needs to be used? Or did we put something in somebody's hands that they used in a way we didn't expect them to, and maybe we need to think about modifications? So we want to think about improving content performance, content findability, quality, reusing it, repurposing it, or getting rid of it. And we want to build a case for content strategy at this time. Okay. So using the audit as a win to get an even bigger win. So we think of starting our audits as, well, we need a spreadsheet. But I'd like us to back up just a little bit and say, no, we don't need a spreadsheet, we need a discovery. We need to be in the room for the discovery. We need to understand what is the tone and brand and message? As content strategists, we need to know this, and this is what's being discussed in the discovery. So we need to be in that room. We want to ask people, what are they doing with the site? How is it serving them? How is it not serving them? Both are legitimate questions. We want to know how the audience is interacting with the site as it exists, if we're redesigning a site. How are they interacting with it? How do you want them to interact with it? And looking at all the information on the site, what can be repurposed? How can we all work better together to maintain the site? So once we are done with discovery, then I'm afraid you're going to have to roll up your sleeves. There is no glossing over this part of the project. If you have a small number of pages, and I'm saying small, 500, 1,000, couple of thousand, you might want to look at all of it. Get it all documented and see what's really going on. But if you are not able to do that, and for a lot of us, we're a one-person department, you're doing the audit, you have this much time. So there are a couple of ways that we can morph this a little bit. One is to do content sampling. Just take enough content on the site to see what patterns start to emerge. And generally, you start to find those pretty quickly. And see what's answering your questions, and try to make the sample representative of the whole site. So if you have different departments contributing to the site, or diverse information, make sure you see a little bit of all of it when you're doing a rolling audit. The rolling audit is another way that we can get to working with a lot of content. And that is just taking different parts of the site each month. So different chunks of it. Say today we're going to focus on certain types of articles. Next month we're going to focus on events. The month after we're going to focus on membership. So just do a rolling audit. And that's a deep dive within each section. So you have these two choices. Either sample across the site or do a deep dive within one single section. And what we're going to start to do is the quantitative work. We're digging into the inventory, the infamous spreadsheet that we all know and love. And we're going to have tons of information on here. But what matters is not what my spreadsheet looks like or your spreadsheet looks like. What matters is that you develop a system that works well in your organization. Whatever works best for you, there is no right or wrong. And I think with a lot of the things you're going to hear from me today, I'm going to be saying that there is no right or wrong. As long as you understand the purpose of what you're doing, how you get it done, the tools that you use, just need to work for you. That's what matters. So, is the inventory going to be by audience? Is the inventory going to be by content type? Is it going to be by owner? Is it going to be by taxonomy? Is it going to be by traffic? You decide. What works for this specific website and your organization? You decide. But you are going to identify things like the purpose of the page and the URL and the performance and the ownership. And if you're going to be building a new site, this is also where you're going to start mapping it to a new site. Okay? And then you're going to be looking at analytics and adding the analytics to the spreadsheet so we can see what's happening. Okay? We're changing a course. We're trying to respond to an audience. We're trying to find ROI in the data. This is your opportunity to look at the analytics that are important to this site and apply them and put them on the spreadsheet. Don't just, when we talk about these things, we often talk in great generalities. And the whole goal of the quantitative audit is to have a document that can be shared to show this is the work we did, and here's the data to show you how your content is performing. Okay? There may be some measures in place that you can apply. Again, how does each piece of content score against our measures? This allows you to make decisions based on facts. Right? If you don't have measures, maybe this is the time to come up with some. and then score your content against those measures. Okay? So you might be looking at the top 25 pages. Why are they doing well? It's a great question to ask. Everybody comes to these pages. Why? What's on here that resonates with the audience? What are these pages doing that other pages are not doing? Okay. You want to look at pages that are getting fewer than maybe 50 page views or 100 page views or 1,000 page views. It's all relative to how much traffic you have on your website, right? And you might want to break it up by department or by topic and say, why aren't these doing as well as they ought to be? What did we miss? How did these compare to the top performing pages? Always asking why. Maybe we're looking by target audience. We say, okay, our pages divide up in these proportions for our audiences, and yet our page views don't match up. Okay? So if we look at, for example, say this is a membership site, and we say, well, 32% of our pages are for members, but they're getting 50% of the page views. The question becomes, should they? Should we have more content for these people? Or should we make all the other areas pull their weight on the site? Which is it? We don't know. Only you know. We're going to look at last revision year. Everyone gets really excited, new website, oh, this content count starts flying onto the pages. And then people get bored. They get overworked. They leave the organization. And nobody's left in charge of the site till you get to a point where pages haven't been looked at for years. So here's an opportunity to say, again, add to the spreadsheet. When was this page last revised? And then we're going to examine the content because beyond storage, there's a cost to maintaining content. I mean, content has a shelf life, right? And the amount of content that you have on your site is going to impact the findability and the usability of that content. People are just going to get overwhelmed like the junk drawer. It's like, well, how do I find all this stuff? So we talk about non-performing content in terms of the acronym ROT, redundant, out of date, and trivial. So we're going to examine each piece of content through this lens. And with redundancy, I had a client who every time a member called and said, I can't find something, they said, well, where would you have looked for it? We'll put it on the menu there as well. All right? Oh, yeah, everybody's had that. So that the same piece of content is in 10 different places, and it's on the menu multiple times, all because one person couldn't find it. Or perhaps many people can't find it, but they didn't think of saying, do we have an architecture problem? We might. So it could be a person who just simply can't figure out how to use the site, and they could be a one-off, but it could also be systemic. We could be having an architecture problem. And so putting the content in multiple places on multiple menus, making it too wordy, that's considered redundancy. So look at pages that aren't frequently visited and talk to your editors and see, are they doing this? Are they moving content around in an indiscriminate manner or posting it in multiple places because somebody said, I can't find that, and they were trying to appease a board member perhaps. Okay. The next piece of ROT is out of date. We have old products, old services, even old news. Why do we need that? I have a client who has 13 years of newsletters on their site. Like, when we migrated it over, we said, 2 years, how does that work for you? And they said, okay. They were okay with that. And I said, what you need to do is go through the other ones and call out anything that's still really important. Maybe make a new newsletter out of them. Make it fresh, make it new. But you don't need to carry all that old stuff. And you might see high-performing content in old content. And that means that it's resonating. So how do we make it new? So that we continue to give people what they need and what they're looking for, but we make it fresh and valuable because there is a concern if our content is too old that maybe it's out of date. Does it really still apply? And that hurts our credibility. So we're looking for old content, anything over 2 years old for sure. And things like link checkers, simple things. How many broken links? I just corrected a whole website where they sent me a whole page of, would you fix these broken links? That was nice to hear that somebody was looking at that. Okay. And then the trivial. Do you remember when everyone wanted that weather widget on their site? Right? And it was cool because it had a little sun or little raindrops, and everyone's like, oh, we need something cool on the site. Let's put the weather widget on the homepage. We're past that, right? We don't need that anymore. Now, if you're a school system, okay, I want to know if school's open that day. It's relevant. If you're not, it's trivial. So let's get rid of the trivial on the site. You want to look at content that's misaligned to top tasks, or doesn't meet any minimal standards that you have for the content. And so you're going to look at some analytics. You're going to separate out the business cases, the real business cases from the fringe, and you might, if you know anything or want to research the core model, it's another whole session that I do on how to align business objectives with user tasks, top user tasks, and that's a very useful way to find trivial content. So we're going to act on the rot. Just get rid of it, revise it, rewrite it, update it, fix it, whatever's necessary. Again, all this goes on the spreadsheet. Here's what's happening on every single page. Okay? And so all the tools for the quantitative audit are things that you get to decide on adopting to your environment. So, do you want to use a spreadsheet? Can somebody build a Drupal view to get you started with it? Do you want to do it from scratch? Do you want to use a scraping tool? They cost money. If you have the resources, if that's going to be helpful to you, fantastic. If you have a bunch of small sites, clients, nonprofits who don't have the resources to pay for something like that, maybe you go with the Drupal views or just do a spreadsheet. It's fine. A different tool does not make the process better. You make the process better. Use whatever's necessary to get you there. Okay? So now we're going to move into the qualitative work, and this is where it gets a little squishy. Because we want to take, even though it's qualitative, we want to turn it into objective decisions. Okay? So we don't want our opinion to seep into this spreadsheet. So reaching back to Christina once again, these are 6 factors that we can audit every piece of content against. And the way that we make this work is we come up with a scale, a rating scale. I would suggest 1 to 3. It could be 1 to 5, and it's never 1 to 10. Okay? That's too broad. I used to work in survey research, and if you tell people 1 to 10, they can't answer you. They don't. You start to get too much nuance in the response. So keep the scale tight. And you're going to measure the quality, you're going to measure the findability, the usability. Is it pertaining to the audience properly? Is it accurate and up to date? You can do a 1 to 3 or a 1 to 5 on that easily. So 1 column in the sheet for each of these audit factors, and rate everything. Okay? Because here's your next step. You are done being alone on this journey. You are now ready to collaborate. Okay? Interactive sessions where we review the results of the content audit puts the work in context of the site as a whole. This is what we need to do to get buy-in from the entire web team, from our clients, from our managers. And this is where we can say we have gaps to fill in. Let's talk about this. Okay? If people don't want to consume our website, there's no point in having a website. So, how many people here would consider themselves the person who would actually do the content audit or is in charge of the content strategy for sites? A lot of you. How many are actual content creators? Some more. Okay. How many of you are designers? Yay. How many of you are back-end developers? Site builders? Project managers? SEO? And you're all here. You're all here. That's what your table needs to look like. If you were at the keynote, you heard him talk about how she wanted a voice in the room as a designer and how her manager brought her into the room. It's essential that you lead the discussion. This is your work. This is where you get to shine. You lead the discussion. Everyone else needs to know, here are the constraints that we're working with. People at the table can provide opportunities. When you say, well, we found a certain condition, a designer might speak up and say, yeah, we can handle that. A developer might speak up and say, we can make that work within the budget, or maybe we can't. Having everyone at the table at this point who are building this container in which our content is going to live is critical to the success of any web project. Okay? In addition, this is a place where we can say we need to have live content to build this site. I had a project where it was imperative that the titles of the posts be 4 or 5 lines long. Now, this is not ideal, and we all know it. But there was a legal requirement in this office. It was a government office, and there was a legal requirement that the words had to specifically match the reports that were being posted. It was an inspector general's office. And the PDFs and the reports being posted had very long titles, and the titles of the Drupal nodes and the way we displayed them on the site had to match word for word. Now, if we didn't have real content to work with, would we have ever thought in a million years that was necessary? No. So let's get away from all the lorem ipsum that everybody wants us to deal with and start front-ending the content so that we know what we're building and make the lives of the development team so much easier. Next, we want to take a clue from the publishing world, right? There's a process. There's a process for managing content. Someone has to own every piece of content. Okay? Having this discussion around the big table, it brings to light the politics that goes on in our organizations. But you've just shown them real data. You have a much stronger voice now. Okay. So we have our content lifecycle that's going to hopefully keep us from ever having to do this again. Okay? So we've now audited all the content, and we understand we're not storing it and hoarding it. But we need a way to prevent the rot from happening over again. So we take us through this process where each content owner understands this is their process. So even though you are going around in a circle on this, you might find that it's time to retire a piece of content at this point. Maybe it's time to reconsider it. Maybe it's time to look at the performance of it. Depends on where you are in the process. Okay?
Just a quick observation. In your experience, sometimes you might be iterating through the create, edit, approve, publish kind of a few times.
Many times through your workflow. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. So yes, if you have a workflow process, then you're going to be going through it multiple times as a person. This is sort of endemic of a piece of content and its way through.
Thanks.
Yes, thank you. So there are a couple of other pieces that fit into this puzzle. Tone. Making decisions based on tone and brand. If you are an organization with a lot of jargon, it's not a place for happy, funny stories. Accept who you are as an organization and make your content align with it. Okay? I also had a client who was responsible for US and China business relations. So every morning, their content people got in early, scanned the news, and determined what needed to go up that day so that they were being relevant. So that maybe they would get a little Google juice by being relevant on the right day at the right time. Not saying, oh, well, our schedule says that we don't post again till Thursday. You've lost an opportunity. So, consistency, scheduling your content, leveraging opportunities, the cadence of how you post fits in here as well. How often do we need to post? How often do we need to edit? How often do we need the homepage and the landing pages to evolve? Okay. You need a process to do all this. So your qualitative tools are many, and some of them align with UX very nicely. You'll see I also have something called a content production workshop on here, where we bring the content team together and let them work together on determining exactly what my friend in the front row just said. What is the workflow going to be? How can we do this? And how often can we do this so that it fits into our business plan? Okay? If I'm overwhelmed by the content strategy process, I'm not going to do it. So let's have a workshop and figure out what can we all live with. And there are lots of workflow tools that we can use to make this work. So as far as outcomes, we have much, much greater alignment of our content. Everyone is thinking strategically at this point. We've identified our core pages, and we've laid the groundwork for the development into the design teams so that we're building the right site for the content that we have, for the mission that we're on. There's nothing worse than being a member of a web team and feeling lost and having to make enormous assumptions about what was meant by any of the requirements that got tossed our way. We're going to have greater usability, the findability of the content, how it ranks. The architecture will be better because we're using real content to guide it in the first place. Okay. And we also have identified all of our content channels so that now we know how to structure all our content. If a piece of content needs to go on Twitter, go on Facebook, we've got all the fields created to actually make that work instead of just leaving it to the world to figure it out for us. We have ownership. Okay? Sustainable content with real owners drives repeatable processes. So we have documented processes now. Now when somebody leaves, we have a process to teach the new person. If somebody's overwhelmed, we have a process to review to figure out what is causing the overwhelm. Okay? This creates a lot of trust. We have a much bigger job than we've been told. And I notice I use the word told, because we have been told we're kind of off to the side sometime, right? It's all about what does it look like? And what interactive features is it going to have? And that's all well and good and important, because we do want our audience to stay a while. But if there's nothing in the container worth staying for, why build it in the first place? So we're achieving some ROI through our thought leadership. And that's big to bring to a table. And finally, cost control. Being able to measure everything, to bring what we learned about the existing content and evaluate what's it going to take to maintain the new content in a much more effective and efficient manner. So now we have a place for everything. And the stuff we didn't need is gone. Okay? It may seem obvious, but it's our job to advocate for content strategy. We're not an afterthought, and this is just the start of it. But you have something to say. We all have something to say. If we learn how to use the facts that are available to us, we will help the entire team become more comfortable with where content strategy fits into the web development process as a whole. Okay. My goal is to make content strategy the norm in every web development project and every web agency. So I hope that you have found a few nuggets today that will allow you to carry that message forth and help us evolve content strategy into a role of leadership. Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes?
So outside of a redesign where there's a large project and everybody's kind of got the buy-in that we're going to have to do a lot of effort, on a day-to-day or week-to-week or month-to-month or season-to-season basis, how do you engage content owners to actually do the full cycle and not just publish and once it's published, forget about it? So think about maybe we should only have a sub-T, or maybe we need to delete or archive, or it always stops at that point.
Right. So the question is, aside from having a big redesign, how do we keep people engaged long term, and rather than just post and delete and post just the normal give and take? And I think that if we go back to one of the very early slides, which talked about when do we do an audit, the concept of doing it on a regular basis is really what's necessary. It has to come from us to say, we've just audited this section of the website. So for us as auditors, as the content strategists, we need to be on a cycle, because the people who are doing the content creation and the publishing need to see exactly why it is that we have to have a process in place. And that data from the audit is all that is what we can bring to the table to them. So to be auditing the site on a regular basis, even after it's launched, then you can come back and, you have this governance plan that says, here's what we do each month. And certain teams have their own schedules. I mean, I think that's part of the content production workshop is really useful there too, because you're getting the buy-in from everyone who's responsible for touching a piece of content. So using process and using data on a regular basis and making people understand, oh, the first day, Monday of every quarter, we have a meeting. And we go through the audit from the prior quarter and say, okay, here's all the stuff that we found that got old this month. Here's all the stuff that we found that was broken. Here's our quality rating on what got posted in this section for the month. So it's not necessarily possible to do the whole website at once, which is why I came up with those two ways of doing the audit. That might be more manageable. And then, again, it's our job to bring it back out to the content creators. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
This is actually kind of maybe a broader question. When you work for an organization that's under an umbrella, there's multiple, I guess, domains, and everyone's in the room. How have you had a situation, and if you have an example, would be great. How do you have an example where everyone thinks everything they have is really important, and you want to go really, like, depending on, based on analytics and everything else, like there's one division that thinks everything they have is great. Everyone's like, how do you, like, have you had a situation where you've had to manage that and go, we know he thinks X is great, however, Z, Y get more traffic, more interest, and how do you, have you had a situation where you had to like manage those type of egos, I guess,
Yeah.
is a better word.
That's a good question. So the question is, how do you manage when there's multiple departments or divisions for whom the site is built, and the egos get in the way, and they all want their stuff. I would say it's important to have the quantitative data to show them. It's also important not to embarrass people. So in that way, I like to, if it's really a large organization, it might be useful to meet with each of those groups independently first so that they can air their stuff out. And you don't get that interdepartmental headbutting, because you will see it if you just bring them all to the table at once. So work with each of the organizations separately and highlight what's working for them and what isn't, and get them to have their process, get them to understand their data and their information and where their stuff is going. And then you do that with each part of the organization independently. Then, once you've made each one of them happy, the whole can come together a lot better because you're coming from a place of buy-in. Okay? I hope that helps. Okay. Additional, yes, up top?
I just wanted to go back to the slide on governance. There were some things I wanted to capture that I didn't get a chance to.
Absolutely. Let me see if I can. Whoops. Tell me which one you're looking for.
It said governance.
The question is this slide on governance.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
We enjoyed your presentation last year, and it helped us a great deal in the year since then. We have Screaming Frog now, so we have the list of the content. We're starting to get the analytics portion of it matched up. For me, the holy grail is being able to see all of that with the content in context. Are you aware of anything that sort of lets you, sort of gives users or clients a tool that lets you sort of see some analytics on the page while you're sort of rifling through the content rather than toggling back and forth between a bunch of spreadsheets?
Other than analytics, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, visual site map, like Dynamapper. We do it every year.
Okay. Thank you for that.
To, the hierarchy context.
Yeah, generic name is just heat map. It shows you like which link clicked how many times during the period.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of.
So like if there's a specific page you are involved, you just look at it, the hot parts are red, so they are the most
Right.
clicked part. That helps a lot to the content owners who doesn't have any technical background. And then when you tell them like red is the hot, the very high traffic, and like blue is nothing.
Right. But as far as bringing all of this data together, and I think it might transcend some of these tools, I'm sure if we had enough resources, then you could, import some of this data into Drupal and do some splendid dashboarding with it as well.
Sure, thank you.
Sure.
Follow up.
Up top?
Are you recommending we don't have archives on the website? If you are, how do you convince someone that we shouldn't have archives on the website?
We shouldn't have our what on the website?
Archives are like newsletters from the last 10 years.
I am recommending that we don't have, the question is, am I recommending that we don't have old content?
How do you recommend if your client is storing it on the website?
If the client is storing it on the website,
How do you get them not to?
how do you get them to not store it on the website? Yeah, that's what their network is for. I mean, I really, literally have done that with clients and said, we've created views where they can see what they're storing on the site, particularly PDFs. We have a lot of clients that store tons of PDFs on the website. We give them the tools to identify what's gotten old. So that's helpful to be able to give them lists, dashboards, things like that, where they can go and actually, you don't want them to have to ask for it, or it has to be part of a process. So if you create a dashboard or create some views that can be posted to a dashboard, so they can actually look for these things themselves, look for the old content. And then there is a point at which it might archive on the site for a short period of time. I wasn't saying that we necessarily go, well, 2 years is a cutoff and nothing can be older. And certainly it also depends on the organization and what your information is about. But you do get to a point where the content isn't timely any longer, or somebody sees a date of 2009, and your credibility is really hurt by that. So I try to help people understand that credibility is an issue, and give them a place on the network, in Dropboxes, wherever it is that they need, where they can archive the things off the site.
And to add to context to that, as the Drupal GovCon, to make sure if we're working on government sites, we're not just using our preference, but we're also following the policies and the guidelines established by our parent agencies and our institutions, and following those, and then building, we still need to follow those requirements, but then also making additional decisions for the
Right, and so to summarize that statement, our governance plan is not just about our one little office. I mean, many of us are given larger directives about how long information needs to stay out there. And so making sure that that's part of your governance plan as well, so that you're not getting yourselves in a situation where it's like, well, we don't want anything older than 2 years, but legally we have to keep this on the, out in the public eye for 5 years. That's fine, you have a reason, and and you need to incorporate that into your governance plan. Any more? I have time for one more question. Yes.
Yeah. Does Drupal or the whole Drupal ecosystem have any tools that will help you identify sort of blocks of text or content that reside in multiple, very unstructured documents, right? So it's on the page and it's on this page, but they weren't designed into like blocks to be initially, right?
Yeah. The question is, does Drupal have any tools to identify the blobs? Other than knowing, when you create your content types, that blobs are a last resort. I don't know of any tools, but I think that it's really just something we have to visually do as we're looking through the audit.
Okay.
Yes?
In a Google Search Console, it identifies certain type of those duplicates and gives you the list. Like this is also here,
Okay.
and it only shows one.
Yeah. So maybe some of the analytic tools can be helpful to you in that regard. Okay. Thank you. It's my contact information if anybody's looking for it.